This is The Naked Life with Roxanne Noor. Hi guys, this is Roxanne Noor. Thank you for joining me today as I have many contemplations from my last week in Berlin. So I was staying in an artist collective that my friend had founded, and she gave me this kind of creative freedom in which I could choose a project, and she would give me videographers, cinematographer to support my vision. And something that had been resurfacing in my mind for a while now, but especially in a post war city like Berlin, that is just so dense with feelings of past depression and heaviness, is a question of what it actually means to be free. Berlin is also a city I've seen with the most type of self expression, from gender fluidity to just openness and sexuality to strangeness in the way people dress. A lot seems like this notion of wanting to become free, wanting to have freedom of expression. And I wanted to talk about freedom not just through a really stereotypical lens of maybe being in an echo chamber of information talking to my friend group, but I wanted really this multiplicity of experience. And so I did some research and I wanted to speak to people in particular that have had their freedom stripped from them. To me, it's really easy to get philosophical about these ideas, and then there's less of an embodied experience about it. And I really wanted to speak to people who knew what it was like to be able to have choice, to have sovereignty to some sense, and then feel it completely taken away from them. And there were two people in particular that I talked to that I want to basically synthesize the information. So I interviewed um, a woman named Golden who had been sex trafficked and is now a dominatrix in Berlin, but she was sex trafficked when she was quite young in Prague in the Czech Republic. And I talked to Mohamad, a Syrian refugee who fled from Damascus to Libya and then on a boat basically to Europe trying to seek asylum and get work. And I also talked to sociologists, psychologists, musicians, immigrants. And so I really feel like there was a large spectrum of people that I was speaking to. What I realized is, without sounding nihilistic, freedom does not exist. But still we try. We try for something. And it's for maybe becoming more and more open. Maybe the correct word isn't freedom, but is becoming more and more able to be open. So there's also this question in sociology that is freedom for or freedom from. So we have the freedom to do certain things, or we have the freedom from certain things to move away or to go towards. And it seemed like, particularly in situations where the external environment is so strong, there is a huge question of freedom from an oppressive rule, like Mohammed being in Syria. He said, in the beginning, the whole revolution, everything was about this notion of freedom. And by the time it's been 12 years now, with the whole Syrian refugee crisis and just 12 years of feeling completely displaced and pretty much hopeless, he said if he could snap his fingers and go back, he would. Because there's the question of what is the use of freedom if I'm not human anymore? And he was forced to flee his homeland for basic survival needs. So there was no financial stability, there was no way to work. Everyone around him who was revolting was getting thrown into jail. You would be forced into the military. So then there is the freedom to say no to the government, but then there are innate consequences. And it seems like the more consequences there are for actions that we deem as true, then the less freedom there inherently is. And the question for Mohammed was, I don't even consider freedom anymore. When my safety has been so taken away, when everything that I thought I needed to feel sane and human has been stripped from me, when I don't know when I'm going to get my next meal, when I'm afraid I'm going to be thrown into prison, or my brother will go into jail, or my mom will be killed on the street, my mind is in survival mode. And that survival mode cares about what will happen today more than the freedom of expression or what is my life. And he said this was the exact tactic of Assad and that totalitarian regime was, we will make you wish for the days you had before. And what you see as freedom is going to be the biggest hindrance now of your life. And with that knowing that Mohammed faced, that being in Syria, what he hoped for the most for aspect of freedom, he was just never going to be able to reach, was in a way a fundamental loss of hope. And with that was the pull to move to a new land just to have basic survival needs met. Then, in the other case of Golden, who was sex trafficked, it also goes into consequence and choice. And so much of freedom is the ability to see that there are choices. In her situation, she was coming from a family in which there was rampant abuse. She was psychotic, so she was in a mentally disturbed place, which was when she was being really predated, which is when basically, um, how you could say the pimps took hold of her. They saw this vulnerability and they latched onto it. It was kind of like easy prey. And she didn't even see a choice in going back home when home was so bad that there was no choice for her besides being in the situation in which she was forced into trafficking, because that was better than what was at home. And in a way, it's similar to Mohammed's case in Syria. When home is so dangerous, when you're not even questioning what it means to be free anymore because all you want is to be safe, there can be no freedom in life without safety. And how much of the world lives in a state where there is just fundamentally no safety? So much, so much. And Mohammed was saying how Syria is actually a good case because the world has been hearing about it. What do we hear about Yemen? What do we hear about Sudan? Myanmar, there's huge military coup oppressing the people right now. How much do we read about it in the news? How much do people acknowledge the lack of freedom in other countries? Not not so much. And so, in this sense, freedom cannot exist if safety does not exist. And then, once it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, once those basic needs are met, then we can think about the future. Then we can think about, okay, what do I actually really want in life? And Golden now, so Golden found a way to get out of sex trafficking. She basically left Prague, went to Berlin with one bag, very little money, and just with this notion of wanting to figure life out. And now she is living in an apartment with her best friend. She's hosting beautiful events. She's working as a dominatrix, so still doing sex work, but within her own scope of what makes her feel comfortable. And she is in disbelief that this is actually her life because she didn't think it was possible. But the more and more she's taking small voluntary steps towards action oriented goals, the more she's seeing how much she can achieve. And it's same with Mohamad. There's the small goals of being able first to eat, being able to provide for the family, then getting residency in another country. There's all these small actionable items that give a feeling of self sovereignty. And so, in that way, then, when we know a path, we feel there are choices on this path and a way in which we will choose to engage with life as a whole. So even if freedom does not exist, if I had no choice to be born into the family I was born in, no choice to belong to this political system that I'm a part of, no choice whether to be Indian background or have my American passport, there was no choice even for the thoughts in my own head because they're just an absorption of my environment. If there are no choices in that way, I guess then what I can choose is what I do with all of that surrounding content. What do I do with everything that's presented to me? And in that very limited scope, what do I decide? And when speaking to people like Mohammed and Golden, who had really faced family and systemic oppression, there was a lot of dialogue about freedom from violence, freedom from starvation, freedom from a totalitarian regime, freedom from sex trafficking. But then the higher and higher up you move in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the more and more certain baseline things are met, then it becomes this narrative of freedom too. One of the people I spoke to was my partner, Nisha Janetz. He is one of the most empowered people I know. And a lot of that does play into his environment. He grew up in Switzerland. He is white, he's male, he's big, he's very beautiful. And so much of the questioning in his life is very philosophical and existential. And because there's so many options for him, it feels like the world is so open. There's a lot of freedom too. He has the freedom to travel the world. He has the freedom to help a lot of people because he feels really liberated. He has the freedom to choose what he eats. He's a vegan and he helps other people with nutrition and fitness. And so, in his landscape of self, there is actually paradox of choice. And there's a question of what does he want most? In that state, for many people, a lot of the Western people I know, there is almost like a paralysis that happens. I have so many options and I don't know which one to choose. I don't know which one is best for my particular situation. So for people like Misha or even people like me, there's this question of okay, the world is pretty much open to me. What do I choose to do with this power? And rather than feeling guilty about it or suffering because the rest of the world seems to be suffering, with this privilege, how am I going to choose to live my life? And going back to freedom being related to consequence, there is the notion that for people like Misha and I, there are less consequences. I grew up in a family that loved me. And so for me to be myself, there were just less consequences. For me to grow up in America, where there is freedom of speech, there were less consequences than me growing up in Syria and saying, fuck the government, and I could be taken away the next day for saying that, versus being in America and being able to make memes of degrading Donald Trump and nothing happens to me. So, what are the ways in which I work with the consequences given to me? And innately, when there are less consequences, there is more freedom and more safety and less boundaries. And it seems like the more we fear, this is the greatest limitation of our freedom. The more there are constructs around us that keep us small, and this can be metaphysically too, small in views, small in beliefs, small in thoughts. Going back to Golden, how she didn't even think she would be where she is now because she didn't even see that as an option until it was kind of right in front of her, this notion of being able to leave Prague for Berlin. And so then we could say that there, of course, are external stimuli, there are external circumstances. And then there, at the same moment, is the foundation of what we believe to be true. And it seems like whatever we want to be right about, life will give us. And it was really interesting speaking to Mohamad about his situation, especially fleeing Syria and fleeing Syria into, before Berlin was Libya, fleeing Syria into another war zone and realizing, wow, this is happening to me again. And it's going to be really hard, but I can choose to risk my life going on a boat for 48 hours, a small wooden fisherman's boat, into the sea to try to find a new life in Europe. Or I can stay in this other war zone wondering if I'll make it. And so there's a choice in the way we choose to survive and what we want most. And it seems like a lot of the way we function is in accordance to what we value. And so much of what we value actually remains in other people. I feel so much of Mohammed's driving force, his life energy, is the fact that he had a family. And it wasn't just about him anymore, it was about giving to something greater than him. And there is a freedom in love, in loving the people around you so much that you are willing to put your skin in the game, to put your life on the line. There is a freedom to loving your country so much that you call things out when things are wrong because you know that there's some capacity for life to get better and for things to change. There's such a way that love is an expansion of self. And I think really the greatest freedom we can all have is choosing to love life and to choose to love life when things are so wrong and difficult to accept. And that's what I felt in Golden and Mohammed, was this continuous circling back to what it is that makes life worth living. And the answer to that question always relates back to love. And the moment that we are disconnected from that feeling of love, then it goes straight into nihilism. Because freedom seems to, based on all the interviews I've done with many other people as well, freedom truly seems to not exist. And yet we try. And it was really similar to, I love Nietzsche's theory of tragedy, and that life is like building sandcastles. And you're building this sandcastle, and there's people building it, seeing that the waves are going to come in and just break this sandcastle down. The waves are going to hit it down, and there's people building really fast and scrambling. And "Oh, I really want to build this sandcastle. And I'm attaching to it. I'm really hoping that this sandcastle lasts, knowing the waves are going to break it down." And those people suffer. But then there's the people who build the sandcastles, knowing it will be torn down, yet they build the sandcastle anyway, and they build it with love and devotion. And this is life. We know that everything is going to be stripped away from us one day. We know that death is going to claim the body. We know that the relationship we care about could end, that the job can be taken away from us, that our own bodies can be mutilated and stripped, that we can get into a car accident. Yet we do life anyway, and we love life anyway. And it's in this doing despite everything, despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, despite the cruelty, that we still engage with life. And this is the greatest freedom that I've seen to me, is that I am choosing to, in some sense, to be here. My friend used to say, you can't go to a party and then be in the party judging everyone, saying the champagne is shit. You chose to go to the fucking party. So be there and see what it's like. See what it's like, feel it, even if it's not enjoyable. And I really see life as this big, grand party, this big, complex game. And the more I realize that even if I don't choose my thoughts, even if I didn't choose my family, even if I didn't choose my name or where I am living, I there's a part of me that chose to be in this moment. And the more I can engage and be in this moment, the more freedom. And that is in the face of consequence. That is in the face of enormous complexity. It's in the face even of my own desires and refining those desires and asking myself, with this privilege I've been given, with this life I've been given, with this love in my heart I've been given, with these innate talents and gifts, what do I choose to feed? What do I choose to nurture and love? And that is the greatest freedom, is with this love I have for life, what do I do with it?